Here we go. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Kim Havens, the event manager here at An Unlikely Story. I'm so excited to welcome Billy Baker to celebrate the release of his debut memoir, Let's Hang Out. He is joined in conversation tonight with Jeff Kinney. Before we start, I'd like to go over just a couple technical tips. If your picture is blurry, click on the help button and you can choose compatibility mode. And you can turn it off at any time. You might be on a slight delay. Oops. Uh-oh. And either Billy or Jeff has another window open. So I'm going to mute them. So if you lose your connection, you can just jump right out of your browser and pop right back in, and you will be able to get right back into the event. If you have any questions for Billy, you can enter them at any time during the event at the bottom of your screen in the Ask a Question box. We'll get to as many as we can towards the end of the event as time allows. If you'd like to purchase a copy of Let's Hang Out, which I highly recommend, you can click the green button in the bottom of the screen and we will get a copy out to you with a signed bookplate. Billy Baker is a staff writer for the Boston Globe, where he writes about the outdoors through narrative features and first-person misadventures. A native of South Boston, he's a graduate of Boston Latin School, Tulane University, and the Columbia Journalism School. He has received the Deborah Howell Award for Writing Excellence from the American Society of News Editors and was a member of the Globe team that was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for coverage of the Boston Marathon bombings. Tonight, Billy will talk about his memoir, We Need to Hang Out, a memoir of making friends, which grew out of a Globe magazine article about how men stink at friendship. In We Need to Hang Out, Baker embarks on an entertaining and relatable quest to reprioritize his ties with his buddies and forge more connections, all while balancing work, marriage, and kids. From leading a buried treasure hunt with his old college crew to organizing an impromptu ditch day for dozens of his former high school classmates to essentially starting a frat house for middle-aged guys in his neighborhood, he experiments with ways to keep in touch with his friends no matter how hectic their lives are, with surprising and deeply satisfying results. Along the way, Baker talks to experts in sociology and psychology to investigate how such naturally social creatures as humans could become so profoundly isolated today. And it was written before COVID, so it becomes even more relevant. It's laugh out loud funny, and I'm getting a copy for my brother and my husband both. Billy will be in conversation with Jeff Kinney, who is the owner of An Unlikely Story and author of the crazy best-selling Diary of a Wimpy Kid series. So without further ado, it is my great pleasure to welcome Jeff Kinney and Billy Baker virtually. I'm going to unmute them both first, and there's Billy. Oops. Hey,
hello.
Hello. Now I got to get Jeff. There he is. And I muted him still. There we go. Sorry, boss.
Thanks so much, Kim. It's great to see her face again. Kim's been out of action for a little while, but she's back, which is great. Billy, when Kim first told me about this event, I was very excited, not because of the subject matter, but because I need friends. So, we need to hang out, you and I, actually. It would be a lot of fun.
That would be, yeah.
Tell me where you are tonight.
I'm in Essex, Massachusetts. I'm on Cape Ann on the North Shore, and It looks like November outside my window. I don't know how it is where you are.
In Plainville, it's just gray. One of my first job actually coming to Massachusetts from Maryland was working at the Newburyport Daily News in one of the best years of my life. So I started off as a newspaper guy too, and I envy you for writing for the Globe, which is a great, great publication. So as Kim said, We Need to Hang Out didn't start off as a book. It started off as an article. Can you give us a spark there?
Yeah, I was conned into an editor's office at the Boston Globe magazine with this. It's one of the oldest lies in journalism, which is we have a story we think you'd be perfect for. And I bit. I went down there. I sat down, and an editor looked across the table at me and said, "We want you to write about how middle-aged men have no friends." And yeah, I in that moment, I mean, I had an existential crisis, and then I tried to figure out how I could get out of the article. And the easiest way to get out of it was to try and rationalize why I wasn't perfect for this story. And yeah, so it didn't, I walked back to my desk and then Globe newsroom, and I just started going through that list in my head of my best buddies. And it was like, I haven't seen that guy in months. And then, I haven't seen him in years. And pretty soon I realized, I'm perfect for this, but not because I'm special in any way, but because I'm like painfully typical. I can relate to this story, and it seems like so can everyone else I know.
Yeah, yeah. And I remember the headline catching my eye for the first time. And then it was everywhere. It was at the top of every recommended reads. And I was wondering what that's like to create something like that strikes a nerve. And how did it progress?
It was wild. I mean, I've been a reporter, my whole career, and sometimes you write something and think like, oh, this is gonna be a smash hit, and then it dies a quick death. But this one, I didn't see. I mean, I didn't see it coming that an article about male loneliness would become this mania. But right away, it just took off. In ways I can't explain it, and then it really took off. It went viral, all over America. It was big in Australia. It was big in Alberta, Canada. That was another place. It was all over. And in the article, I wrote about what is defined as this loneliness epidemic. And there was lots of really terrible health data on what being lonely or even living alone will do, not just to your mental health, but your physical health. And when the article, within the article, I basically raised my hand and admit I'm a card-carrying member of this problem, and didn't really realize I was. So many people that read the article wrote to me, and it wasn't like they wanted any more proof of the cancer. They weren't like, tell me, they didn't need to be proved that there was a problem and they had this problem.
Yeah.
The question was, what's the cure? And the cure, like, is its easiest answer in the world. Like, the cure for loneliness is friendship. But what the book is about is how weirdly complicated that is as an adult, and how much effort, how much failure it took, and how it's become essentially the norm to be a sort of lonely, solitary person in this modern age.
Yeah, and I was really surprised at some of the statistics. Can you just rattle off a few of the, how bad is it to be lonely?
I mean, to this day, when I write one of these statistics or read them, it feels like they're laying it on a little thick, like that it can't be that bad. But anything you don't want, being lonely, feeling slightly isolated, having loneliness is this condition where the social interaction, social connections you want don't meet the ones you have, right? So it's a perception. So like almost everyone falls into that category. And as such, everyone's kind of, suffering from these things. I mean, it's heart disease, it's obesity, it's all these things they call deaths of despair that are just ravaging middle-aged Americans, like the alcoholism, drug abuse, suicide, depression, all these things. Like, they just go up and up and up. And then the reverse is that if you look at any measure of happiness or satisfaction or contentment in life, the number one predictor of that is simply having a strong social circle, an active social circle, not just having friends, but hanging out, finding a way to be friends with your friends, and making that a priority. And if I was guilty of anything, if there was one big revelation at the beginning of this whole journey, it was that when I woke up every morning, I mean, I ticked off a lot of good things. I'd be a good dad, a good employee. A lot of stuff was going right. I'd go to the grocery store, but friendship just wasn't a part of my daily life. And ultimately, what the book is about is a journey to return that to my daily life.
Yeah. In other countries, you said actually recognize loneliness as a health crisis. Can you tell us about any of those countries, what kind of systems they have in place to address loneliness?
So the number one in this category, I think, is England. They've really been proactive about this, especially as it affects their seniors. And they, a few years ago, to much publicity, they made a minister of loneliness, a cabinet level position, just to combat this problem. Because in England, there's all these like wild anecdotes that seem to all have some connection to England about how prevalent and how prevalent these issues are, but also how tricky they are to combat. So one of the biggest problems with loneliness in general is that people don't want to admit they're lonely. People won't walk into a therapist's office and say they're lonely. We've made these great strides where people will walk in and say, I'm depressed or I'm an alcoholic or something like that. But to say you're lonely, which was the bind for me at the beginning of this journey, like you feel like that kid sitting alone in the cafeteria eating by themselves. So in England, they have this thing called the Silver Line Helpline for seniors to call if they feel lonely. And it gets a staggering amount of calls every day, like 10,000 calls, something like that. And almost nobody admits they're lonely. They call and say, call and ask for a recipe for basting a turkey. Or there's like one woman that calls every hour to ask what the time is, right? But they just need someone to talk to. And that's something that's very difficult to admit. And so England has tried to tackle this as a systemic problem. But in the US, we're also making strides. I've become somewhat centered in this issue. And it's amazing how many people will reach out and talk about the work they're doing. A lot of work with seniors, and then a lot of work on the other end with youth who are suffering in polls. We know that every generation of Americans is measurably lonelier than the one that came before. And sadly, our loneliest generation yet is our youngest generation. And there are a lot of people working on that at that level as well.
But how can that be if we're, we feel like we're more connected than ever through social media, and we can find our own tribes, and subsets of tribes and all of this. So how is it possible that at a time when we're most connected as a society, or we seem to be, that we're this disconnected?
Right. So the social media is the grand question of our time. It so far the science is kind of lost in a chicken and the egg problem, where we know people who spend a lot of time on social media are measurably lonelier than those who don't, but we don't know if they're going there because they're lonely, right? So I think we all know in our gut that there's something that's just not totally fulfilling about social media. I personally, as part of this book, quit social media to see, the only way I could find out was to see the effect it had on me, and it made me a better friend in real life. I had to be a better friend in real life. But I feel like it's person to person. Like, are you on social media? Do you find it's a satisfactory way to be connected?
I've been asking myself that question lately. Is that, I've been asking a question. You came up with a great phrase, dumb thumb scrolling, I think. Is that how much of our time do we do that? And what my path has been, I've never been a Facebook person. I'm a Twitter person. That's how I get my news and hear what other interesting people are thinking. So that's good for me. But I honestly, with the election being over, I have had much less of a reason to be on it because I was tracking every single parsec of that, whatever you call it, and now I'm just like, I am not in that world anymore, and I definitely am happier. But the question I ask myself when I go on social media is afterwards. It's like, do I feel better or worse?
Right.
It's like you never walk out of a McDonald's saying that was a good idea,
And that's actually something that has been studied, and it's across the board. Every social site makes you feel worse at the end. You will measure worse, but interestingly, the one that makes us feel the worst is Instagram in these studies. So, and I quit everything, but I do confess I have what I think the kids call a Finstagram, like a fake Instagram. It's like all I do is follow certain people I need to know about, but ever since I learned that fact, like, I will shut Instagram and have this moment where I kind of self-assess, like, do I feel better about myself? And the answer is no. Like, I don't. I feel like there was just something I saw that made me feel jealous or inadequate or angry, or I don't know. I don't know why I went there. I think I meant. Go ahead. I'm sorry. That was the end of my point. So.
I liked how you said that you said that on social media, people aren't there. They're not people, they're personas. And I've definitely learned that is that social media is all about kind of projecting the best version of yourself. And I do it too. I have a brand and I'm an author and all that. But I don't talk about being vulnerable or anything like that on social media. So I thought that was a really good takeaway. you introduced me to the first time to the lonely scale, and curse you for doing that.
Oh, no kidding. You're the first person. Did you take the test? Do you have a number?
I took it. I seem to recall that you were very upset with your score. Was it 38 or 48?
I forget. Whatever it was the dead average score for Americans.
I landed a 60.
Okay.
And then the app it said you fall into the category of severely lonely.
Oh,
and it gave me a bunch of health resources. So thank you, Billy Baker.
Well, it's funny. I want to say knowing is half the battle. I want to make this reference, but in the book, I talk about this happiness professor at Yale who is at war with that phrase. It's like knowing isn't half the battle now. So now, Jeff, the battle is in front of you. I mean, the best thing that ever happened to me was being forced to raise my hand and admit, I am falling into this thing, and then to take action, to be forced to take action, I'm sure. So I went through this, trying to figure out what it is. And the key ingredient is effort. That's the key thing. So once you got to do something about it.
This is going to turn into a free therapy session, which it shouldn't.
Well, let's stay on this. Like, do you have like a good friend in your life? Do you have someone you're hanging out with in your immediate orbit?
You're in like my top 3 now. I'll tell you a happy story so we can move off this. This is pretty funny. Okay, are you a Celtics fan at all?
Oh, what's that?
A Celtics fan at all?
A little bit, not religious. Okay.
So years ago, when the Celtics, traded Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce, they knew they were going to be terrible. So they came up with these ads, and one of them featured on this guy. This guy, like they featured on the guy. They focused their ads on the people in the bleachers and the upper decks who were in it because they were real fans, And there's this guy, tall guy, African American guy with really cool, crazy hair, and he told the story about how he was like, what it means to be a real Celtics fan. First time I ever saw the ad, I cried literally because I'm a Celtics fan. And every time that ad came on, my kids would be like, Dad, the ad's on. And I'd come and sit down and watch it again because I loved it so much, right? And then I said to my kids, I was like, I'm going to be friends with that guy, right? Okay. And so one day I was in the hallways of, the TD, right? And here comes this guy straight out of the ad. He's got his whole entourage with him. He's got a Celtics jacket, all this kind of stuff. Can I take my picture with you? He was very, happy to do that. And then I happen to have an empty seat that night because, as we've established, and so I said, hey, come down and join me for a second. So anyway, that was the start of a great friendship.
Really?
I've spent my past 7 Christmases with him. And
really? Whoa, okay.
He's coming over on Saturday to watch Kong versus Godzilla. So, I've got one.
I mean, that's the greatest story I've ever heard. So that doesn't connect with anyone else's story in life. But wow, I'm proud of you. Like in this book, in this journey covered in this book, a lot of times my friendships came from something weirdly in that category where I just kind of felt some spark with a person. And that's often reserved for like romantic things. Like you're not supposed to feel a spark when you see a tall guy with cool hair in an ad and be like, I want, but like that's happened. So I pursued these sparks, and I think we have them in life. You meet somebody, kind of connect, and then you say these polite things like, we should grab a beer sometime. We should, it's a nice way of saying, hey, I like you more than just a hi, how are you? But it's kicking that one into the net. That's the hard part, because you got to go home and be a dad and be an employee, be a middle-aged guy who's like tired at 8:30 at night, right? Like, I mean, these things that are real realities of modern life.
And I've noticed that there are a number of women who are tuned in right now, which is great. Hopefully they're watching for themselves, not just for their husbands. But a lack of meaningful friendship seems to hit men harder than it hits women. So why is that?
Well, so men do not have a monopoly on this. This is across the board. It hits men harder. So something interesting to understand on a base level, which was one of the first things I learned about friendship, is that there's a fundamental difference in the way that men and women interact. And women talk face to face, and guys talk shoulder to shoulder. It's these things that we learn from sociologists. Just creep around, take photos, analyze them for patterns, and that's a crystal clear one. And once you know this, you can look around the world and see it everywhere. I think for that reason, women are still better able to maintain friendships over the phone. We know this from studies. Guys, like with my guy friends, after about 30 seconds, like, all right, I'll catch you later, right? Like, we're done with this. We need some sort of some activity to be something we're going through together. And I think that those become harder to come by as you go through life. Whereas, you know, if you really can maintain, I envy the ability to maintain a strong relationship by just checking in over the phone every now and again. Like all my intense moments with guys, all my strongest connections are when we are like physically doing something together. And that becomes harder. And you know, there's a lot in the book on this issue of female friendship. This was a book about male friendship because we're the worst at it. And there's not much in the literature out there about this topic. You know, women are much more open about simply having this conversation than guys. But women, so a lot of this book was about trying to answer this question of why are women better in a purely selfish way. I wanted to find things that I could steal and take back to the boys' cabin, right? Like, and walk in and whisper, like, here's what they do when we're not around, right? Like, but there are just fundamental differences. I mean, there are things like, I admire the way women refer to their friends as girlfriends. Like, you know, we would never say my boyfriend's coming over. Dancing. If guys just got together and went dancing occasionally, like, I think like the good juju between us would solve the world's problems. Instead, like, you know, we would never do that unless it's like, you know, at midnight at a wedding, right? Like, other than that, like there are all these things I wrap in, but I'm envious of women on many levels, on many things, but their ability to maintain a connection is something I admire. I will add one negative about women, two negatives though, because guys take a lot of heat in this book. One is that we know from studies that when their relationships do end, they tend to end like in an explosion, right? Like guy relationships seem to softly go away. Women have a blow up, not all of them, but we know more than men. And the other is that women, if guys are going to talk crap about another guy, it's probably the guy right in front of them, where we know from these studies where they kind of snoop around and eavesdrop on women that you spend a lot of time talking about someone who is not present. But the thing is, that may seem cheap, but gossip, and especially mutual dislike of a third person, is like bonding cement. Like, these are things that are proven to be real deep connectors. And so if we need to steal anything, we need to get together and gossip about someone who's not there.
Right. And you talk about this idea of collective effervescence, I think you call it. You know, this idea, you went to a New Kids on the Block cruise and saw women dancing together. I think there is one equivalent for that in the man world with music, which is basically like a headbanger kind of concert, right?
Yeah.
The hair swirling and all of that. There it exists, but probably not many other places. But I will say this, I'll just give you a teaser for when we hang out together.
Okay.
I recently went to a heavy metal band fantasy weekend.
Okay.
Which was only 20 people in the band for the whole weekend.
Wait, explain this to me. I don't get what this is.
I'll say almost nothing more than that. That's the appetizer for our having a beer together. But it was about 20 mostly dudes, and it was a heavy metal band from the 80s, and you had way too much access to the band. It was like every meal, karaoke, trivia, cocktail. It was just like, it was too much. It was too much, but it was a very bro thing to get, and we experienced it shoulder to shoulder. Something else, you talk about having a sense of purpose and someone to talk to, and something to do. A place to be is also important. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so there were two things that I learned about. This was basically like a 3-year journey chronicled. And there were two things I learned at the beginning, and they ended up kind of crossing and becoming an important factor. I had heard there were these guys in my town that did this thing, older guys, like they're all sort of retired now, but for decades they've been doing this thing they call it Wednesday night, and they just get together on a Wednesday night, and it's that simple. And I'd heard that before I started all this. Then after I wrote the book, and I wrote the original article and started getting all this feedback from Australia, a lot of the Australians would tell me about this thing called the men's sheds, which is exactly what it sounds like. Yeah. It's this, it started at a senior center in Australia in the 90s, I think in the 90s. Anyway, we'll say like 20 years ago, this guy, this old guy threw a fit one day. He was just like, all these activities are for geared towards women. We don't want to do bingo. We want you. He's just throwing like a tantrum. And he said, here's what the guys need. We're going to there's a shed out back. I'm cleaning out that shed. And that's for the guys. That's just our place to go. And then this guy, his name was Dick McGowan. He actually had developed kind of a philosophy. And one of the things was this statement that men need somewhere to go, something to do, and someone to talk to. They call this thing a men's shed. He gets some publicity in a local like newsletter, and before you know it, long story short, before you know it, there's 1,000 of these sheds in Australia. Okay, it's the simplest damn idea in the world. Men's shed, what is it? Well, you get what it is. It's a men's shed. But that idea of having somewhere to go is so vital, and for our generation, it feels like those things that used to be the norm are fading. Like there's no Elks clubs, or they're around, but like I don't know anyone in these things, and they used to be more the norm. The bowling leagues, whatever it might be. So I basically tried to steal that, combine Wednesday night with this men's shed thing, and to create a little Wednesday night club in my community and do it around this idea of we need somewhere to go. So I got this guy to loan us his barn. We had this sort of, night where I may have overdid it a little, said everyone secret invitations, and a dozen guys meet me at the barn. I didn't even fully know a lot of these people, but it worked. It was, if there's one crowning achievement of this journey, it's that I solved I got to this point where I was doing all these things in my past. Yeah. And that was great. I was reconnecting in my past, but I realized I hadn't really solved the problem in my present. I didn't have someone to hang out with on a Wednesday night. So what I did was try and solve that by combining this Wednesday night idea with this men's shed thing. And it's going strong. It's become, it's gone through waves, but right now during COVID, it's become a bonfire club. Like we get together. Who knew that that's all it took was a bunch of guys to light a giant fire? But all right, we're gonna get the cops called on us one of these nights.
We have a thing that is only annual, but it's what is it? We get together on Christmas Eve, which is like such a bad idea. It's like you can't go away from your family on Christmas Eve, but we get together at like noon at a bar. And I really don't know these guys very well. So I've come up with a joke that you have to be, this is the excellence, what is it? Like the Plainville Men of Excellence Club or something like that. And that to get in, you have to have an invite, and you have to be the best at whatever your field is, however narrow so one of the guys is an undertaker, and then there's somebody else who's a banker, but this guy does a different thing. And so I'm thinking we could get like burgundy jackets and the rifle club and all that kind of stuff.
Wait, how did this start if you don't all know each other very well?
Somebody just said, somebody I loosely knew just said, get together at the Chieftain basically at noon, and I took the bait, and it was cool. It's only once a year, but I get it. It's good to have a place to be.
And those annual events, that's something else I put a lot of effort into. Like, it's surprising how that's enough in some ways. Like for me to see someone actually once a year is better than, a lot of my relationships. So I love the annual event. I envy anyone, and I hear from a lot of people who tell me these things like, oh, since the moment we graduated college, my buddies and I said every Memorial Day we're going to go here, right? And like anyone that's kept that up is benefiting immensely from that. Or, you know, and the alternative is if you don't have one, start it, you know?
I agree. And I think a place to be really is key. I'm glad that you identified that in the book, because like I remember when Shaquille O'Neal first came to the Celtics, to bring it back to the Celtics for a second.
Yeah.
I remember I was like, oh, this is sweet. I was like, I'm going to get to meet Shaquille O'Neal. And then I was like, why do I think I'm going to get to meet a ticket and see him from a distance? And then we built a bookstore, and I was like, now I can invite Shaquille O'Neal to the bookstore. You know, having a place like matters a lot. You know, and in your book,
that's true. You do own a bookstore. Now that I think of it, I had to borrow a barn, but you own a bookstore. All right, so Jeff Kinney, here's our thing. You and I are going to, I don't know what it is yet, but we are going to have an April Fool's Day annual event, okay? It's easy enough to remember. I feel like I know you write about these things. I feel like, all right, I'm calling it. You and I are going to play an April Fool's Day prank on each other each year. And it has to be legit, okay? So that is our annual event.
Yeah, okay. Let's agree to a budget of under $10,000 for the prank.
I'm not agreeing to any budget, okay?
So here's the thing about your book. You finished it, and then COVID started. The irony must have been rich. What have you learned since then? Everything about COVID must have amplified your message.
I mean, it amplified it. I'm hoping that it just made us so aware of it. I think the biggest problem for a while is a lack of awareness of this thing. I got in right as this moment seemed to be starting. I think there's a reason my initial article took off. There were some other people trying to do work in this space. Vivek Murthy, who was the Surgeon General under Obama, the loneliness epidemic was like his thing, like his platform. And it you know, when we were kids, like I remember C. Everett Koop was like trying to take on cigarettes, right? Like this Surgeon General was taking on loneliness. So the moment had arrived, but my hope is that COVID is like what tipped it to the good way, right? Like we've all been telling ourselves we are desperately craving these moments when we can gather together and gather in groups. Like, I don't know about you, but when I'm like watching a movie or something and they show a bunch of people crowded into a concert, it feels uncomfortable. You know, I'm like, oh, what is that allowed? Is that ever going to be allowed again? But I mean, I want to, you know, I'd love to go down like your neck of the Great Woods. What is it called now? Like I would love to be crammed in at Great Woods, you know, and see a show this summer, you know, things like that. But I'm hoping that, you know, obviously COVID's done terrible damage. I'm actually working on a story right now for the Globe about all these studies that have come out this week showing how much weight gain there's been collectively. Yeah. And I'm trying to turn it into something funny and positive if you can, but you know, I think we know all the issues. It's the question of how do we come out of it, and I don't think there's any chance we're going to come out of it without some sort of awareness and appreciation for friendship and connection that hopefully has a lasting impact. Yeah,
and I actually wrote an article for the Globe Sunday magazine, and it was right at the start of the pandemic. It was about kids. You know, trying to give a message to kids about resiliency during the pandemic. And that kind of had its button today when I wrote a letter to graduating seniors in a local high school, you know, for their yearbook. And I wrote that my son, one of my sons is 18 years old. He missed his senior year basically. And I keep telling him, I'm like, man, that for every, you know, action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. It's like, is it possible that COVID will be, the isolation that comes from COVID will be a springboard to this explosion of connectivity?
Yeah, I mean, that's if I had to bet, that's what I'm betting on. You know, it has to be like I'm in this room full of random Postit notes, and a lot of them are like things I want to do with people once the all clear has been sounded, like their trips, their whatever. But it I mean, we're craving it, and we're just realizing, that you see these like dire images of like, people in a assisted living center who've been locked in and haven't had a hug in a year. Like, they were lonely before this, like hopefully we'll wake up to the fact that like, they haven't been getting enough hugs across the board, not just during COVID, like these things that, I'm hopeful, but that's the $1 million question. And did this book land at a good time? Like I hope so, but I hope I'd love for this book to become obsolete. Just steal the cliff notes of what I did, and some science, and it's about taking action, finding these velvet hooks that connect you with people. That's what I'm trying to spread.
I'm going to be very presumptuous, and I'm going to give you a story idea that you can use. It is all these kids, you think about my son, for example, it's like from his junior year, spring, until the end of his senior year, it's been basically not much contact with his, he's had some contact with his friends, but, and then all of a sudden in the fall, if they're vaccinated and everything, this group of boys and girls and kids are going to come together in a way that's really unprecedented. It's going to be pretty hilarious. I think who knows what that's going to look like. So you could plant yourself at the exit of a dorm, of a co-ed dorm, and ask a lot of questions.
I mean, I hope he has the best freshman year of college ever. Like they're just something's gonna they're going to be given a license that they've earned to go wild.
I agree. Okay, so I've hogged you for a lot of time, and so we're going to open it up to questions. And I know my mom and dad are watching, so hi, Mom and Dad.
Hi, I think my mom is watching as well. How's it going? And your parents, if they have ideas for the epic April Fool's Day prank to play on you, please contact me.
Okay. All right. Kim, do we, let's see, how should we do this? If somebody wants to ask a question in the right-hand side, they can, or if somebody wants to ask a question, the ask a question box, they can.
Yeah, no, nobody has asked one in the ask a question box.
Because we're so
well, there is one in here from Patrick. Basically, it says there are a lot of activities for young people and old people, but places with social events like libraries expect middle-aged people to have families. And if you don't, you're kind of screwed when it comes to meeting people. I've heard this quite a bit. I did an event the other night, and a woman I went to high school with who's single raised that issue. Like, and I get it, because I think one of my follies was thinking that when I became a dad, I would just we moved to the suburbs. We did something a lot of people do. I thought naturally my children would be the connector for me. I'd meet the other dads on the sideline or whatever it might be. I don't know how I would have navigated that if I were single. So, friendship. So I wrote a book about friendship, but I'm not an expert on it. And I will say that I don't think anyone's an expert on it, or we all are, right? In the catch is that we're all individuals. We all have our own stories. I looked at this problem through the straw of, my life. But I mean, there's issues, if you're single, if you're divorced, if you're a widower, if whatever thing there might be, we each have our own path and our own struggles. But I think the answer, I think the answer is the same. It's a matter of being aware. What are your actual, where are you in your social connections right now? How is your friend life? Assess this, get on the scale like Jeff and I did, take this UCLA loneliness scale, and you'd probably be disappointed, but that's a call to action. We've all gotten on the scale in the bathroom and been like, all right, today's the day I got to fix some things. Right. Yeah. So, it might be easier for married people with families to have built-in connection, but it's still a matter of putting in the effort and following through. I became annoying in a way. Like, I had to be the guy who was like the social chair, forcing everyone together, but putting in that effort, going for it, it ended up being the greatest gift I ever gave myself. Like, I have a tribe. I have active membership in a squad, and I did not have that for a long time.
That's really cool. And the book is really uplifting in that way. Something about that conversation. What's that, Kim?
Jeff, your mom is watching on Facebook and she's telling Billy, oh, I have ideas.
Okay, good. All right. I want to know, like, is he afraid of anything? Is it snakes? Is it spiders? Like, what is it that?
I'll put a lot of production value into it, and I'll be amused and impressed.
Okay.
So Rick has a question. He says, explain your work with the 150 people. How did you work through that process? He thought it was really
so in the science of friendship, there's this one name that comes up over and over. It's a man named Robin Dunbar. He's a professor at the University of Oxford, and he seems to ask the best questions about friendship and social connection. And what he's most famous for is a question that arose from studying primates. If you could look at a primate social group, the size of that social group always corresponded with the size of a part of their brain, the neocortex. And so Dunbar reversed that and said, well, if we look at the size of the neocortex in human, what is the size of their social group? And he came up with this number of 150. And that number is now known as Dunbar's number. And when I first heard this, the idea is that this is a number of like active, strong social connections you can have. He defines it as the people that you would not feel embarrassed to join for a drink if you just happen to run into them in a bar. So when I first heard this number, 150, I didn't know if that was a lot or a little. Like I couldn't quite figure out. It was like, do I not, do I really know that many people that I'd have a beer with, or is that it too low? So I did, I started writing down names on the Postit notes and putting them on the wall of this office. It looked like, if the FBI had raided, that would have been it for me. Right. But I wrote them down, put them on the wall, went to everyone in my phone, everyone in my Facebook connections, got the number 148. After I counted them, I was shocked. And then I opened the door and I heard my children talking and realized I didn't have phones or Facebook accounts. So I'd forgotten to write down their names. So boom, exactly 150 people. And so that, by going through that exercise, which is not what it was designed for, right? And I will say this about Dunbar's number. After he proposed it, they started to find it everywhere. It's the size of like hunter-gatherer clans, and it's the size of legions in the Roman army. And a lot of companies have even adopted it as a management strategy. Like if a division gets larger than 150, they break it into two. But once I wrote down these names of people, it surprised me in many ways, in that I was surprised at some names that were on there. There were people I hadn't seen in forever, or people that I maybe worked with briefly, like that. But something about their name triggered that spark in me. I had that connection with them. Another benefit of that exercise was letting go of these people that were occupying too much real estate, too much time in my life, when we just really didn't have that connection. It was a negative energy. So I kind of let go a lot of that. This was right before I ultimately quit Facebook, which was letting go. I mean, a couple hundred of those people in that category of like, I met this person once and I'm mad at them for their political statement they just made, right? Like So Dunbar's number, Jeff, you're the first person to read the book and then go take the UCLA loneliness scale that I know of. I think you should be, the next thing you should do is write down your 150 people and see what how illuminating that is. It allowed me to start to realize that, like, a lot of people I thought of as acquaintances really meant a lot to me. Like people that sit next to me in my office, I probably talk to them more than I talk to, my best friends, and it's okay to think of them as new best friends.
Yeah. Yeah. And you said that best friends it's not a kind of a person. It's a tier, right?
It's a tier. That's a line I stole from Mindy Kaling. And that was freeing, because it meant the part of this journey that was about trying to add new best friends to my life. And we know from surveys that when you ask people to name their best friend, they name someone from childhood or high school and maybe college, but there's a cutoff. There's this implied idea that you really have to go back with someone in order for them to earn that best friend title. But when I heard Mindy Kaling say that thing, a best friend is not a person, it's a tier, it felt like I could elevate new people to that, and I wouldn't be betraying the others. They're all on the podium together. They're all like, I love these people and would do anything for them. And I could say, since I sort of digested that quote, put it on this wall, I have added 4 new best friends to my life in my 40s, right? Like, I mean, and that's a miracle. But it was from feeling like I'm not cheating on my friends from the past if I pick up the phone and call him rather than him right now. But, it became a question of who can I be friends with on the regular? I need some to find a way to be friends with my friends. And for me, it was building a squad in my new community and not trying to relive my past.
And we only have a minute or two, but I've seen a glimmer of hope right now that might be a false flag. I see a Michelle Stirk Barrett has written, and I had an old friend named Michelle Stirk. Michelle, is that you from Villanova, or is this a new Michelle Stirk? And she asks, while we're waiting for her to type her response, she writes, in your research, how did you find that people's friendships changed after they became empty nesters?
So that's not an area I super research. It's, I mean, there are chapters in life, right? And a lot of people seem to really excel at that empty nester level. And I think, if anything, I was probably guilty of waiting for that, thinking that wait, hold on. These are all your Villanova friends.
I'm so excited. Yeah, we're getting back together.
Wait,
you keep talking. It's fine.
No. Well, so all right. I think what's happening here is you're having a mini reunion on this. So, like, rather than talk about a friendship, why don't you be a friend? Who are these people?
And Aaron, we really need to hang out. But you know what's funny? Look, I'm sorry, I really cut you off.
No, this is funny. This is more interesting than whatever I was saying.
Well, Aaron and I, Aaron is a very dear friend, and he's definitely in the best friend tier. We had shoulder to shoulder, activities. We went to the Celtics, we went to the Patriots, and that's been taken away by COVID. It would be we'll find our way back to each other. but that's how we connected. You're right. Aaron and I would not sit across from each other at a table, or not often, at least. So I think I do feel very badly for getting distracted, Billy.
I'm so sick of hearing myself talk. I mean, if anything, I'm a cheerleader for friendship and for magical friendship moments, and that's what's happening. You should see your face, Jeff. You're like blushing. You're like super happy right now. Like, this is good. This is the perfect way to end.
And I'll say one funny thing about Villanova before we ask just one more question from the gaggle, is that Villanova, I went there for a year, and then I had an ROTC scholarship. I dropped it because I wanted to become a cartoonist. And so I only went for a year, but I made some good friendships there. And so my son recently applied to Villanova, and it said on his application, have you ever had a relative go to Villanova? Yes. It said, how many degrees? 0. He didn't get into Villanova.
I didn't get into Villanova either, I must say.
It's tough out there. Billy, we're going to ask one more question just so we don't end on my story. Do you think that people who have a religious community are more or less likely than non-religious people to feel lonely?
That's a fact. That is a true statement. People in religious communities, we know they are measurably more connected. So there's this thing called the Blue Zones, which is a National Geographic reporter years ago identified these 5 spots on planet Earth where people live long, healthy, happy lives. And there are certain threads that run through all of them, and one of them is some sort of a religious basis. The only one in the United States is a community of Seventh-day Adventists I think it's in Utah, but they're like, active into their 90s, and their happiness levels are off the charts. They also, I think, they abstain from alcohol and things that would be beneficial to a long health span. But church is a big one. There's this thing called F3. And it means something like faith, fitness, and fellowship or something, but it's basically a national men's group that's really thriving, a Christian group. And they just get together and work out every morning. I think I have never been, but I think that's the gist. They get together, they work out, they have a little bit of Bible study. These guys are like so into it that they yell at me constantly on Twitter that or wherever that I didn't mention them in the book. I didn't know anything about them, but I think church is any sort of social glue. I mean, a lot of people have church in other ways, like some people have that thing every week they just won't miss, and that's vital.
Here's Kim reminding me that we have another event in 9 minutes. So
yes, we do.
Billy, this was really great. I enjoy getting to know you. Aaron, like I said, we need to hang out. And thank you so much. And Kim's about to remind everybody what they can do with that green button at the bottom of the screen.
Click the green button. Get this book. You will love it. It is so funny and just speaks to a lot of people. It spoke to me even realizing, like, hey, who are your friends? But thank you very much. I love April Fool's, Billy. I'm teaming up with you.
All right. This is like, I'm like so committed. My kids are big fans of your books, and I think that this is like a 12-month family project that just began.
We have a whole year.
Watch out for the boomerang prank. All right, thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
And thanks everybody who showed up. It was really cool to see some old friends on the right-hand side. So thank you guys very much.
Yeah, this was super fun.
Bye. Thank you.